Let's look at what we just did with a summary diagram. We built a custom service called Product Service, and in it we defined several functions that express the business logic for the application. We injected that service into the product detail controller by passing the service into the controller function. We then called one of the methods in that service to calculate the margin percent and assigned the result to a variable on the model. The binding in the form then displayed the margin percent on the detail page. Now we want to reuse the logic in the product service to build the Price Details tab of the Edit feature. This feature will ask for the cost and allow the user to calculate an appropriate price based on a desired markup percentage or a specific markup dollar amount, or the user can simply type in a price. We'll again display the margin at the bottom for reference. Let's add this to our sample application. Here we are back in WebStorm with the Product Edit Price View HTML file open. We had previously created the skeleton for this view when we created the route states. Let's replace the simple text with the HTML to build the view as we saw in the prior slide. I'm going to paste in all of the code for this page, and then we'll talk through it. We are creating a new form. We are using Bootstrap to lay out that form horizontally for a consistent look with the other data entry forms. We give the form a name so we can implement validation. And we specify no validate so that the browser won't validate the form, allowing Angular to perform the validation. Each data entry element is defined as a form group with an ng class for validation, as we discussed in the validation module earlier in this course. The form group has a label, an input box, and a span to display the validation messages. The second form group displays two buttons, so the user can select to calculate the price based on a markup percentage or a markup amount. These buttons use the btn-radio directive provided by UI Bootstrap. UI Bootstrap is the component we used previously for the date picker. It provides radio buttons that look more like sticky normal buttons. The ng model directive defines another variable on the model called price option. If the user picks the markup percent button, the price option variable is set to %. If the user picks the markup dollar button, the price option variable is set to amount. The code will use these values to change the display in the view. The next group uses the ngIf directive, so it is only displayed if the % radio button was selected, which set the price option equal to %. This group provides for entry of the markup percentage. The next group is similar. It is only displayed if the amount radio button was selected and the price option variable was set to amount. Each of these two groups has a calculate button. The calculate button has an ng click directive, which calls the calculate price method on the model. We have not yet created that method. The next form group is for the price. We can either populate this price with the calculated value, or the user can enter the price. There is also a row for the calculated margin percent. This uses an Angular filter to format the percentage so it is displayed with no decimal places. Notice that the binding expression here is calling a function. That is needed because the margin percent must recalculate every time the user updates the cost or price. This last group contains the same two buttons as we defined on the other tabs. There's a submit button, which calls the submit function, and a cancel button, which calls the cancel function. Let's run the application and give this a try. So we'll go to Product List, we'll pick Garden Cart, and we'll pick the Price Details tab. Okay, the display doesn't originally look very nice, but if we click Markup Percent, we can see that it looks much nicer. When we click Markup percent, an additional set of controls are displayed. We can then enter a percentage, say we want to mark up the cost by 10%, and click the Calculate button to recalculate the price. But notice the Calculate button isn't currently working. That's because we have not yet written any code for this button. We can also click Markup $. When we click that, the screen changes and allows us to enter a markup amount instead. So we might want to mark it up by $5. But again, the Calculate button doesn't work. Also notice that the margin is not displayed. So there are several things we need to do here. First, we need to consider setting a default value for the radio buttons so that the initial screen comes out more clearly. We also need to define the code for the Calculate button, and we need to ensure that the margin percent value is calculated. Let's do that next. As with the other edit tabs, there is no controller for the Product Edit Price view. Rather, all of the edit pages share the Product Edit controller. The first thing we said we needed to do was to set a default value for the radio button, so let's do that first. The variable used by the radio buttons was price option, and we're going to set that to an initial value of %. When the screen first comes up, the user can enter the margin percentage to calculate the price from the cost. Next, we want to calculate the margin percentage. In order to do that, we need to inject the product service into the Product Edit controller, just as we did with the Product Detail controller. So we'll put it here. And we need to add the parameter to the min-safe array. So we'll put it here. Now we can call the function. So we'll put it here, vm.margin percent equals. We could assign this variable directly to the service, but instead we want to make it a function. By making it a function, it will recalculate every time the price and the cost changes. So we simply want the function to return the product service dot calculate margin percent. And we're going to pass in the price, vm.product.price, and we're going to pass in the cost. Next, we'll define the code for the Calculate button. We could define two separate functions, one for calculating with a markup percentage and one for calculating with a markup amount, or we can combine the logic into one function. This function calculates the price based on a markup. It checks the value of the price option variable and performs the appropriate calculation. Let's give it a try. We'll go to Product List, we'll edit the garden cart, go to Price Details. Notice that the Markup percent button is now toggled on by default, and our margin percent is displayed. The current price is $32.99. That's a margin of 39%. Let's enter a markup percent of 50 and click the Calculate button. The price is now 30 and the margin was recalculated to 33%. Since the Submit and Cancel buttons were already defined in the Product Edit controller, these buttons should just work. Let's try the save. The save was successful. We have now implemented a full-featured Price Details edit page for our application that uses the business logic we defined in the custom Angular service.